A black sea, ice on the gunwales, tarred rigging snapping in the wind, and not a single flame on deck. No crackling fire, no glowing brazier, just 30 men riding a wooden knife through winter water. So how did Vikings keep warm without fire on their ships? Here's the truth the sagas hint at, and archaeology backs up. They didn't try to heat the ship. They heated the people, with cloth that worked when soaked, shelter that folded out of the sail, food that burned like fuel inside the body, and a rhythm of rowing, watch, and sleep that turned motion into warmth. It wasn't cozy, it was brilliant. Let's start with the obvious myth. If you picture a charcoal brazier glowing on an open longship, sparks drifting onto a tarred sail, you're picturing a floating funeral. Viking hulls were oak and pine. Rigging and seams were treated with pitch. Spare lines, wool, and hay lived everywhere on board. A stray ember in a beam sea. One puff of wind, and your central heating becomes a signal fire to the gods. That's why the rule at sea was ruthless. No open flame under sail or oar, not on a fighting longship. Even on bulkier cargo fire was rare and controlled. Lamps shaded for light, cooking kept for land, and if warmth was needed, you did it with bodies, cloth, and cleverness. Cloth first. Vikings wore heat tech that modern hikers would respect. Lanolin-rich wool, layered like strategy. The outer cloak, a heavy woven wool, think wadmal, was naturally water-resistant because of the sheep's own oils. Under it, more wool, shirts, hose, and nola-binding mittens and socks, dense, almost felted. They stay warm when wet. They added fur, sheepskin, or reindeer when they could, and lined boots with dried grass, yes, really, to trap air and wick moisture. The trick wasn't staying dry. On an open boat, that's a prayer. The trick was staying warm while wet. Wool does that. It traps air, and lanolin shrugs off spray. Sailors also greased their cloaks with tallow or fish oil. It smelled like the harbor, but it shed water like a duck. Shelter next. A longship looks naked in a museum hall, all rib and plank and dragon neck. At sea, it could put on clothes. Crews rigged awnings and deck tents, called tjalda in saga language, by lowering or unbending the sail and pitching it over sparred hoops or a simple ridgeline, then lashing the edges to the shield rail. That canvas, wool sailcloth, made a low, wind-snug tent amidships or aft. Under it, you laid straw bedding, rolled up by day, spread by night, kept off the wet planks on wooden grates. On cargo ships, cannar, some voyagers even used a small cuddy or deckhouse, a tight wooden shelter, not for fires, just for sleeping and maps that were mostly memories. The shields hung along the gunwales were not just for show. Lashed on the rail, they acted as a windbreak, knocking down spray and slicing the wind that steals your heat. Now, the engine you carry inside. You cannot shiver in a blizzard and live on bread alone. Viking rations were calorie bombs, dried fish, salted meat, hard cheese, butter or tallow, barley cakes, and drink that didn't spoil, ale, sour whey, and watered wine when trade allowed it. Fat is a furnace. One hunk of cured pork is a portable ember. On watch, men chewed on dried meat and drank lukewarm liquid from leather bottles tucked beneath cloaks, held close to the chest, warmed by breath and ribcage. When ashore, they heated stones in the fire and dropped them into liquid to make it hot. At sea, you carried that heat inside you as food. The goal wasn't comfort. It was thermogenesis. Feed the body, keep the fire, in the belly burning. Movement did the rest. You do not sit still on a longship and complain about weather. The weather does not care. Crews were divided into watches, half rowing, half resting, rotating through the bench so everyone's blood got stirred. Rowing is a stove with handles. Your core turns, your legs drive, your arms pump. Even in a fair wind, tasks kept men moving. Trim the sail, tend the sheets, bail the bilge, always, check seams, shift cargo for trim, beat ice from rigging with the back of a knife, so you don't cut your own lines. When you stopped, you huddled, 2 or 3 under one cloak, sharing body heat, backs to the wind, knees tucked, mittens pulled into sleeves. Group heat is a technology as old as the first camp, and Vikings had no shame using it. Quiet men in a quiet tent don't waste warmth with talk. Seamanship is warmth too. If you sail where the water wants you dead, you learn to pick your weather. Viking captains watched sky and swell, high mare's tails, banked clouds, a certain heave to the sea that said, bad squalls behind that headland. In truly murderous cold, you sought lee behind an island or along shore, dropped the anchor or beached the hull, flipped to shore mode, and lit your fire on rock, not oak. There you cooked, dried socks by the flames, warmed stones in the coals, and tucked them into fur wraps for night. Back aboard, those stones were a brief blessing against ribs or feet, heat banked from land for one more watch. Did anyone ever risk a braziers on board? On a moored ship under awning, in flat calm, with a covered soapstone lamp or a sheltered pot, possibly, carefully, briefly. But a live coal and a fresh gust are not friends. The safe default? No fire on the water. Materials mattered. They carried soapstone pots. They hold heat and don't crack easily. Whalebone or horn mugs that don't steal your heat like metal. And seal oil lamps for light. Tiny flames hooded against wind. Their warmth too small to help, but they're light enough to mend a torn mitten or check a frayed line. Cloaks pinned with brooches doubled as sleeping bags. When lashings iced, they sprinkled salt, saved for the job. And when the sail froze stiff, they held course on oars until the sun or labor softened it. Nothing wasted. Everything earned. And then there's psychology, the silent layer. Cold isn't just temperature, it's time. Crews learned to count a night in watches instead of hours, to mark survival in tasks completed rather than degrees endured. Bailed the bilge, beat the ice, swapped the bench, 3 more stars until dawn. Cold loses power when it cannot name how long it has you. A bad hour, then a better task. A worse squall, then a lee under the sail. The brain rides the ship the way the ship rides a sea, by not fighting every wave, just the wrong ones. What about winter voyages? Vikings were not fools in love with heroics. They launched in seasons, hugging coasts, reading daylight like a clock, and harboring when they could. When winter crossings were forced by war, weather, or trade, the solution wasn't heat the ship. It was more men, more cloth, more food, more caution. A prudent captain kept a margin in every decision. Freeboard high, cargo low, shelter rigged early, land made whenever the sky promised and spite. Warmth wasn't an object on board. It was a strategy you harvested from 20 small decisions made on time. Let's be honest about limits. Even with wool, fur, tents, and fat, men's hands still went numb. Frost nip on cheeks and ears happened. The oar's loom could bite the palm until blood slicked the wood, then froze in bright skin. The answer wasn't comfort, it was competence. Gloves came off only when they must. Mittens got swapped between men on the bench and men under the awning. Socks were wrung and warmed under the cloak against a belly. If your neighbor's jaw chattered, you didn't joke. You jammed him under your cloak until his teeth stopped counting the seconds. Pride keeps you cold. Teams keep you alive. There's one more truth to say. Not all Viking ships were the same. Longships were long, lean, and fast. War greyhounds, where warmth meant wind and muscle. Gnar were fuller-bellied traders, with higher freeboard and better shelter. On a fair run, you could sit out of the spray on the lee side and, for a luxury minute, feel your fingers again. Iceland and Greenland routes demanded the most caution. Captains followed bird flight, whale paths, and the smell of land. Yes, sailors used their nose to keep the risk inside a human budget. Across all of it ran one rule: fire belongs to land. What belongs to the sea is discipline. If this kind of no-myth, feel-the-salt history is your thing, if you can taste the tar and hear the oarlocks, hit like right now and drop a comment with the trick that surprised you most. The grass in boots, the tent from the sail, or the fat as fuel diet. Your nudge helps this reach more curious minds who think Vikings carried campfires to sea. Back to the cold. Let's walk a day on winter water. Dawn watch, ice feathers along the sheer strake. Two men beat rigging with the flat of a blade until the lines flex. The helmsman keeps the steering oar steady, cloak wrapped, knees braced, eyes on a pale notch in the cloud that marks the sun's lie. Under the awning, a man wrings his socks and tucks them against his stomach, then shoves dry grass back into his boot. Midday, the wind is right, so the oars ship. Half the crew trims the sail, half eats. Hard cheese, dried fish, a slice of lard, swallowed like medicine. They don't waste heat talking. They chew and breathe. Afternoon. Swell rises, spray finds faces, shields shut out the worst and take the slap. A man's hands go dumb. His mate jams them into his own armpits until the pain returns like fire pins and they both nod. Dusk. The captain sniffs the wind, watches the birds, feels the swell shift under the keel. Weather's dirty behind that headland. He chooses caution. They roof the ship with the sail at anchor in a lee, or they take the beach if the surf allows. Night, fire on rock, boots propped near heat, socks steaming, a soapstone pot turns snow to drink. Stones set by the coals go into fur wraps for sleep. They laugh once, briefly, because tomorrow is another arithmetic of wind and water. Then the fire dies, and they carry it inside, the only safe place to keep a flame on an oak hull in January. Did they ever cheat? Sailors always experiment. You can imagine a crew trying a covered brazier on a flat calm, awning pitched, coals hooded. Men forming a windbreak with their bodies while someone warms his hands for 60 stolen seconds. But the rule that kept more crews alive than died was the one the elders repeated: coals on land, oars at sea. The few small flames allowed, oil lamps, were for light, guarded under hoods. Heat was a human project, not a ship's feature. What does this say about Viking engineering? That their heater was systems design, fabric plus food plus workflow plus seamanship plus social rules. Wool was their outer shell, diet their inner furnace, row and rest their thermostat, tents and shields their weatherization, leadership their failsafe. They didn't fight the sea with gadgets. They bargained with it using skill and margins. That's why a ship with no chimney could survive a week of sleet and send men ashore ready to fight. If you're picturing it now, dark sea, low tent, 30 breaths steaming in one moving cave, you've got it. The ship doesn't need to be warm. The crew does, and they made themselves into a heater the sea could not blow out. If this voyage through cold truth worked on you, if you can feel your fingers again just reading this, share the film with a friend who still thinks there was a campfire on every dragon ship, and subscribe to History Mind. We read every comment, we carry the good sentences forward, and we'll meet you again where a hard problem and a simple solution built a legend.